The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson and The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan are two of the most popular fantasy series of all time. The former is only at 4 books out of the planned 10, but still racks up a whopping 1.5 million words. And that's not even counting the other books set within the connected universe, otherwise known as Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. The Stormlight Archive tells the interconnected stories of a cast of magnificently and meticulously crafted characters, exploring themes of pride, grief, purpose, and trauma, all set within the dark and dangerous world of Roshar. Dangerous storms and endless war ravages the land as our heroes come to terms with their place in the fate of the world. The latter, The Wheel of Time, is an epic 14-book series clocking up at about 4 million words. The story is a bit more traditional but no less epic as we follow another group of gifted characters, fighting and fleeing from unspeakable evil while also trying to understand the true power shaping their destinies. Both of these stories are amazing, long, and compelling, but the question is, which is better? So there it is, I guess that decides it, at least for me personally. What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. I make videos every week on fantasy and horror books, doing deep dives, discussions, and reviews, so if that sounds like a damn good time, then I would love it if you stuck around. Today I want to try and tackle a pretty challenging question. Between the Stormlight Archive and The Wheel of Time, which is the better story? I should rephrase that. Between Way of Kings and The Eye of the World, which is the better story? So these are both the first books in either series, and because I'm still reading through these series, we'll be focusing on those books specifically. What happens after the first books in the series does not matter in this video. I cannot stress that enough. And I actually started reading both of these series just this year, so I think this is the perfect time for me to compare them. I'm new to both of them and my thoughts are still fresh. I will be comparing these books in separate parts to try and help me decide which of them I enjoyed the most. Characters, setting, story, and writing. Also, I feel like I should really quickly give credit to Daniel Green, like he needs a shout out from me, because he has done videos like this before. The idea of comparing books directly against each other is a pretty standard concept, but I still wouldn't want anyone to think I'm just ripping him off, you know? So I'll link some of his versus videos below as well. Again, I am only talking about the first books in the series, and I know some of you are going to disagree with me. Some of you might even disagree hard. I am as sure of that as I am that mint chocolate was God's biggest mistake. If you do disagree, that's fine. Let me know what you think in the comments below, just, you know, don't be an absolute turd. Okay, so both of these books, like a lot of fantasy, have a numerous cast of characters, and we very often switch between their perspectives, or POVs, as the story progresses. In Way of Kings we have Kaladin, Shallan, Dalinar, and Szeth. In The Eye of the World, the cast is a bit bigger. Rand, Mat, Perrin, Nynaeve, Egwene, Tom, Lan, Moraine, and Loyal. So obviously with Way of Kings, being that there are less major characters, we do get to focus in a lot more on their individual and intimate experiences. Both books deal a lot with themes of personal trauma and rediscovering your purpose, which I love. The main difference between the two is that Stormlight Archive's characters are on very separate journeys, both literally and emotionally, and they actually don't even become like a group in this first book, whereas in The Eye of the World, the characters, for the most part, are a solid group working towards a collective goal. This isn't a problem or an issue by any means, but it does mean that we get a lot less insight into their individual motivations, goals, and emotions. That makes sense for the story. You just can't put that kind of hyper-detailed focus into each character when there are so many of them and there is so much other stuff happening. The stakes are very high from the get-go for Wheel of Time, so compared to Stormlight Archive, we do get a lot less time to really connect with the characters. When I think about these two books beside each other, I just can't say that I cared as much about any of the characters in The Eye of the World as I did for Kaladin, Dalinar, and Shallan in Way of Kings, even if I did immediately fall in love with Loyal. For characters, I have to give it to Way of Kings. So Way of Kings takes place almost entirely within the Shattered Plains, which is quite literally a barren, crab-infested wasteland filled with caverns, dirt, and blood. There are these high storms, extremely violent gales that literally reshape the land and the ecosystem, and you could fairly say that that is a part of the setting. The high storms are truly awesome. However, when it comes to the Eye of the World, which again is just book 1 in a 14-book series, we travel with the characters across countless landscapes, towns, environments, and major populated areas. One of my favorite things about this book, The Eye of the World, is how cozy and terrifying the world is at the same time. While I love what Brandon Sanderson did with a literal wasteland and the storms there, it just doesn't hold a candle to the expansive and fascinating settings plural, that we get in Eye of the World. Because not only are the characters traveling through these locations, but we're also learning about other cultures and places that they could go, which makes reading on all the more exciting. The winner for setting goes to Wheel of Time. Okay, so this is the hardest comparison to decide on. It's so hard that I would go so far as to say that it's fully bricked up. So I'm going to summarize both books, again just the first books, without spoilers, and that's a tricky thing to do, but I'll put it like this. The Way of Kings is about Kaladin, a former soldier and now disgraced bridgeman, Dalinar, a noble high prince losing grip with troubling visions and the dwindling respect of his soldiers and family, and Shallan, a young woman trying to save her family by stealing something important from a dangerous magic user that she's coming to really care for and look up to. They are all struggling with who they used to be and who they want to be, in a world ravaged by war, petty politics, and increasingly devastating weather. The Eye of the World is about a small group of young adults living in a simple country town that are thrown violently into a world-threatening conflict involving prophecies of doom and factions hell-bent on destroying each other. Someone is prophesied to be the Dragon Reborn, someone who can channel an immense source of power, and someone who will be responsible for either saving the world or breaking it, as the last dragon did. The group travel over many locations, led by a magic user, or Aes Sedai, named Moraine and her ward, Lan. They're chased the entire way by monsters and dark dreams. Safety always seems out of reach, and they have to come to terms with the fact that their lives will never be the same. Those are super condensed summaries of those two books, but I've actually also done full in-depth discussion videos on each of those books, so if you'd like to check that out, I'll leave a card up here. So which story do I think is better? I had a really hard time with this, but ultimately I landed on The Eye of the World. Look, maybe it's subjective, but I feel like as far as being the first book in a series goes, Eye of the World really throws us in the deep end and the danger, rather than Way of Kings, which is a much more slow and deliberate build-up. So much of the world and the magic of Stormlight Archive is still shrouded in mystery by the end of the first book. I loved it, don't get me wrong, but I didn't feel as close to understanding the world and the major plot, the big conflict, as I did with The Eye of the World. With that book, I knew exactly what the big danger was. Plus, just personally, I'm really partial to the feeling of a long journey, rather than a story set mostly in one location. For story, I'm going to give this one to The Eye of the World. So now we get into one of the most technical aspects to analyze, and that is the writing styles. You know, a lot of people think that The Wheel of Time is a lot more classic than it really is. The Wheel of Time books weren't written like back in the 50s with Tolkien stuff. The Eye of the World actually came out in 1990, so the writing is super readable still today. Now, we aren't talking about the story here, just the writing itself. So when it comes to Robert Jordan, I will say this: he's pretty good. Great even, but Brandon Sanderson's writing is incredible. His ability to write magic and character depth was just leagues ahead, even in this first book in the series. The way that Brandon wrote Kaladin in particular was so deeply heartbreaking and empowering that I almost can't believe that the entire book wasn't set from his perspective. I'll make another comparison. The action. Robert Jordan, again, is pretty good at writing action, but Brandon Sanderson, he does it better than most authors I've ever read inspired from. His prose is snappy and it's to the point. He's able to build mini climaxes within climactic moments. There'll be a massive conflict, and within that conflict, there are little sectioned climaxes in those fights. He's just really good at what he does. I have to give this one the Brando. Okay, so I realized at this point that we're kind of at a tie. I didn't really plan for that, so I'm going to throw in one last category. Which book made me the most excited to read on? Like, after finishing the first book in the series, how keen was I to pick up the second? I won't say how the books end, but I will say this. The Eye of the World felt a bit more conclusive than Way of Kings. Like, there is still a lot of unanswered questions and obviously much more adventure to come, but it left me feeling more satisfied and like, nice, rather than, but what happens next? You know? Way of Kings, however, that ending, I wouldn't even say it's a cliffhanger, but the climax of this book is so incredibly flabbergasting that I had to read on right away. Way of Kings had unanswered questions too, but they were much more new and urgent questions, and I had to know the answers immediately. I have to give this point to Way of Kings as well, as much as I do look forward to starting on The Great Hunt. So there it is, I guess that decides it, at least for me personally. The Way of Kings was more enjoyable than The Eye of the World. As for whether Stormlight Archive is better than The Wheel of Time as an entire series though, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Again, I'm sure a bunch of you are shaking and crying and thrusting your little fisties at the screen right now, like screaming at me. So go ahead, vent in the comments. Just like I said, just don't be a turd about it, that's all. It's all fun, you know, this is just an opinion from some dude that can't even drink milk without browning his slacks. Who cares? Who cares what I think? Anyway, if you want to see lots more fantasy book videos, stick around. See you in the next one. Catch ya.